So good afternoon. My name is Alicia Wimbush. I am the program director of religious leaders at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. I would like to thank you for joining us for this afternoon's Lunch and Learn, where we will explore Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish perspectives on spiritual care. As you can imagine, we will just be touching the surface of this topic, but I hope it will be an enriching and informative conversation. And again, as people are coming in, if you wouldn't mind putting your name, your role at your organization and where you're coming in from. If you could put that in the chat box, that would be wonderful. We hope that this is an opportunity not only for you to engage our panelists, but also engage one another. So it's good to know where folks are coming in from. So after the panel discussion, we will have time to meet some new folks in breakout rooms. I understand that not everybody will be able to stay for that, and that is completely fine. But at 1 o'clock, we will have about 30 minutes where we'll get to network with each other and build some relationships. And hopefully you'll also get a chance to engage some of the panelists on a smaller, intimate level as well. So we hope you'll stick around for our breakout rooms. And then also just wanted to let you know, we will have a time of Q&A after our panel discussion. One of the staff members, you'll see Christine, she has submit questions here. So throughout our discussion, if there's any questions that come up, we ask that you submit your questions in the chat box. If you look at the drop down, you'll see an option for submit questions here. So we'll collect them throughout the program and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Our panelists have been so generous. They will share their information with you, their emails, if you have specific questions for them, as if we're not able to get to them during the Q&A time. So again, feel free to submit your questions as we have our discussion. So I am so delighted to introduce our guest panelists. I have had the pleasure of getting to know them over the past, some of them over the past couple of years, others just over the past month. And I have to tell you, this is a wonderful group of people, spiritual care providers in the DMV area. I have learned so much from them as I've been in conversation. And so I am going to share very briefly their bios. Their full bios are on our website. So if you want to get to know more about them, you can definitely check that out at our website, icjs.org. But I'm going to go ahead and just do some brief introductions, and then they'll share a little bit about themselves as they answer the questions today during our conversation. But I want to first off introduce Gen Kelsey Chogden. She is an American Buddhist nun and the resident teacher of Gandapa Meditation Center in Maryland. Gen Chogden has been practicing Gandapa Buddhism since 1998 under Venerable Geshe Gelsan Gyatso, who gave her the title Gen, indicating that she is a senior ordained teacher of the Gandapa tradition. We welcome you today. So glad you're with us. And then next, I would like to introduce Chaplain Tahara Akmal. From personal and professional experiences of interfaith work and world travel to sacred, spiritual, and religious sites, Chaplain Tahara Akmal develops a passion for ministry within pluralistic environments. Chaplain Akmal is an Association for Clinical Pastoral Education certified educator. She is the first Muslim woman to become a certified educator by ACPE to teach chaplaincy within a clinical setting. And currently, Chaplain Akmal is the manager of clinical pastoral education and a chaplain at MedStar Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you, Tahara. So glad you're with us. And then next we have Christopher Houston. He is a native of North Carolina. He is a published author, noted conference workshop speaker, nonprofit founder, and a professional clinical and corrections chaplain. A member of the Central Office Senior Chaplaincy Team, he serves as the National Faith-Based Reentry Coordinator for the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C. Christopher, so glad to have you with us. And then we have Rabbi Bruce Kahn. He was raised in Baltimore, graduating from City in 1963. He was ordained in 1974 and immediately entered the U.S. Navy as a chaplain. He served 2 years on active duty and 26 years in Ready Reserve, retiring from the Navy in 2002. He is currently Rabbi Emeritus at Temple Shalom in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Rabbi Bruce, thank you so much for being here with us. And like I said, they all have extensive bios. I didn't want to spend the whole time reading all of it, but as you can see, these are people with amazing backgrounds, wonderful stories and experiences, and we're going to learn so much from them. So I thank you all again for joining us for this conversation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm actually going to have you each actually share your answers in the order in which I just introduced you. So hopefully you remember your order. But I'll start with you, Gen Chogden. In 2 minutes, would you share with us what drew you to the work of spiritual care, and how is spiritual care understood and practiced within your particular religious community? Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
I had instant recognition of in my first class about 25 years ago that this was my spiritual path, but I wanted to make sure that it was authentic. So I attended international festivals and teachings to meet our lineage holder, Venerable Geshe Kelsang Gyatso Rinpoche, in our larger community of Kadampa teachers and practitioners. I study Buddhist teachings, learning to contemplate and to meditate on them and to gain the power to make changes in my mind. Then I put the teachings into practice. They work incredibly well to reduce suffering and increase my peace and happiness. So I decided to retire from my profession and devote the rest of my life to practice in depth and help others to be able to do the same. Thus, I chose to be ordained in 2005, and in 2007 was asked to be a main teacher at a center. I'm a visiting chaplain at Bayview Hospital and the University of Maryland as well. So spiritual care is understood and practiced in our religious community. Buddhism is like finding the best mentor for a career. Once we find a fully qualified teacher from an intact lineage, we practice his or her teachings to become just like them. Buddhists are honest about the sufferings and the cycle of impure life, and there is a well-defined path within the mind that hundreds of thousands of men and women have accomplished over the last 2,600 years to attain permanent liberation from all suffering and the complete purity of full enlightenment. Our main form of spiritual care is to offer Buddhist teachings of Sutra and Tantra, to give people the opportunity to fulfill their deepest wish for lasting happiness and to gain freedom from suffering. We teach meditation so that people can learn to gain the wisdom of listening, of contemplating, and of meditation to make these changes in their mind. So we offer various chanted meditations and prayers for milestones in life, such as baby blessings, blessings for marriage, meditation for sickness, terminal illness, and death. And prayers are incredibly important in our tradition. And of course, our teachers are available for questions, discussions, visits, and advice.
Thank you so much, Gen Chogden. That was so helpful to just hear the ways in which spiritual care is practiced within your tradition. So thank you. All right, I will go to Chaplain Tahara.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you just for this opportunity to be amongst friends and colleagues to talk about spiritual care. I would say that growing up in a household where two different faith traditions were practiced or present have a lot to do with my foundation for the work that I do. My mom growing up, she was a Baptist woman, and my dad was a devout Muslim. So in our family, we celebrated both traditions. We would have Christmas and Ramadan and Easter. I remember when I was young, and then, you know, the different Eids. But as we got older, as we were being raised Muslim, we eventually transitioned to just practicing the Islamic faith. But I never heard my parents argue or talk about religion. Religion wasn't a topic of tension or separation or disconnect. So I just thought all people kind of just celebrated their religious traditions together. And where I grew up in Southern California, my neighborhood was very diverse. So I was born into this family of interfaith love and compassion. And then my neighborhood kind of mirrored that. And in the Islamic tradition, we have so many examples of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his kindness and compassion and love as a model of spiritual care. As I was going through the process of becoming a chaplain and, fitting my Muslim identity and theology into the Christian context, I would draw from traditions in our Islamic faith, for example, the idea that the divine says, for every footstep someone takes towards visiting someone who's struggling or sick, that the divine is showering that person in mercy. And so the mercy kind of encompasses that person for every footstep to get to the person that's suffering. While they're there together, the mercy is still over or kind of shrouding them all the way until the person gets back home. So for me, that was just an image of there's something very special about visiting people who are suffering and struggling, and the divine is giving us an invitation. So for example, there's a Hadith Qudsi where the divine has said, oh, so-and-so was sick and you didn't visit them. And then the person says, you're the Lord of all the worlds. How could I have visited you? And then the divine says, well, if you had visited so-and-so, if you visited Alicia or Christopher, that when you visit them and they're suffering, you are in my presence. So for me as a chaplain, I kind of hooked on to these couple things and others, like this is a divine invitation for me to be in the presence of the divine and to care for humanity.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I love that idea of mercy following us from the beginning to end. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Yes. Chaplain Christopher.
Thank you, Alicia, for the invite. I appreciate it. And I'm really excited about being a part of this panel with all these distinguished pastors and leaders and spiritual experts in their area. I thank God for the opportunity that I've had with regards to understanding my spiritual walk. Growing up in the Baptist church back in North Carolina, I grew up in a household raised by my grandmother, which explains some of my old ways. But growing up raised by my grandmother, who was she worked with social service. And I remember driving around, not driving, I wasn't driving at the time, but I was riding around in the car with my grandmother as she cared for people. I saw a very practical example and expression of our faith. My mother was very astute in the teachings of God, and I was always in awe and inspired by how she taught God's word. And so I had a very delicate balance of teaching and action, which brings me to what I believe is really one of the main aspects of what we talk about with regards to spiritual care from a Christian perspective. Spiritual care can be practically understood or summed up, if you will, in this simple little equation that I learned back in seminary. Concern plus expression equals care. Just concern is not enough. Just expression is not enough. You put the two together, and what we call in our Christian walk, faith and works coming together. And this idea and this concept of unconditional love, expressed by one of our favorite scriptures in the Christian walk, for God so loved the world that he gave. It was an expression. There was an expression. It wasn't just a belief. He didn't just love you at the heart. He expressed it. He found ways to express his love for all of humanity. And that is how I look at spiritual care as a model from a Christian perspective. If I can take my last maybe 30 seconds here, when you talk about how I got to this journey, you can trace back to my time in seminary. In my last semester, there were 15 minutes that if you take those 15 minutes away, I'm probably not a chaplain. I probably don't have this amazing experience over the last 23 years of chaplaincy. It was a CPE supervisor who introduced CPE to me and gave me hope that that there would be an opportunity for me to serve immediately, not waiting on a church, not waiting on some of the other traditional ways, but I would have the opportunity to immediately serve and care for people in the way that I saw my grandmother, in the way that I heard taught by my mother. And in those 15 minutes, it transformed my life. And I am now 23 years truly blessed and looking forward to another 20 some odd years of service in whatever way God would find that I can both not just be concerned about humanity, but I find a way of expressing it as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Christopher. I wrote down that formula you gave, concern plus expression equals care. And for me, what resonates is that sounds like compassion, because compassion, you could have empathy for people, but there's also action behind it. So thank you so much for that. All right, Rabbi Bruce.
Hi, folks. I'm also delighted to be with all of these distinguished panelists, and I have tremendous admiration for the Institute of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. And I'm very grateful to be in the presence of all of you who are attending today. There were many preliminary steps that brought me to seminary, such as the tremendous influence of one of my grandfathers and also especially my childhood rabbi, as well as feeling a powerful and deep down sense of God's presence that guided me and strengthened me. But it was in seminary wherein one professor of philosophy, Rabbi Dr. Alvin J. Reines, spoke the words which made clear and certain that I would pursue my rabbinical service for the rest of my life. He taught that our purpose is to help individuals and groups of folks move toward wholeness of being, shalemut in Hebrew, and to help them based on who they are. In Leviticus 19, we read, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. But my approach to spiritual care would interpret and employ that teaching this way. Love your neighbor the way your neighbor needs to be loved, given who your neighbor is. You know, in Jewish life, chicken soup is nicknamed Jewish penicillin. When I get sick, I may want someone to visit and bring me chicken soup. Does love my neighbor as myself mean that when my neighbor gets sick, I should go and bring the soup too? What if my neighbor wants to be left alone when ill and does not eat chicken soup? To love my neighbor as myself must mean doing for my neighbor the things she or he favors, given who she or he is, just as I would want done for me. That is the case concerning a decision to visit and bring chicken soup, and it is the case with regard to delivering any and all aspects of spiritual care.
Thank you so much for that, Rabbi Bruce. I love that whole sense of you really have to listen to an individual to see how they want to be loved and cared for. We just can't assume that. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. How we're giving care matters. So, such rich conversations. I feel like I can go even deeper, but we're going to move on to our next question. So how does your religious tradition shape the care you provide people both within your tradition and individuals who are from a different tradition? Is it the same? Is it different? And again, we'll start with Gen Chogden.
I'm so delighted to be with everyone here as well. So I want to pick up on what Rabbi was saying, because that is essential in our Buddhist practice, that our goal is to develop universal love and universal compassion for every living being without exception. So everyone is welcome to any aspect of our tradition in terms of meditations, classes, and it's so important to meet people where they are. In fact, we have a lot of good heart teachings that help us to understand that we have to adjust to culture, we have to adjust to people's belief systems, we have to meet them where they are and really help them in the way that they want to be helped. And I think that that is really essential. And of course, what we're doing is helping them to learn how to recognize and reduce all of the painful thoughts and feelings that they have in their mind, because there's no training in our Western society about how to do that. So they're very specific instructions and very clear definitions of how to do this. And it's so wonderful to bring this information to people, whether they're Buddhists or not Buddhists. Everyone can benefit from learning how to control their mind. I think that this is incredibly important to understand that we have this ability to actually make changes in our mind, which lead us to greater peace and happiness and away from suffering. And of course, Buddhists really understand that suffering is normal in our cycle of impure life. And because we believe in past and future lives, the purpose of this life is to prepare for our future lives. And even if you don't believe in past and future lives, becoming a more thoughtful, kind, considerate individual who really genuinely keeps their intentions beneficial and learns how to stop harming is very wonderful for everyone. So I think that that's very important to understand, that our worldview is really to help bring about world peace by helping everyone to be able to change their mind into a mind that genuinely cares for others.
Oh, thank you so much again, Chagden. We need that more than ever, so thank you. How to bring about that universal peace and love. And how about for you, Chaplain Tahara, how does your religion shape the care you provide those within your tradition and those who might not be a part of your tradition?
Yes, thank you. I was thinking of, there's a verse in the Quran where it says that the divine has created humanity different. We're from different nations, we're from different tribes, we have different colors, different shapes of our body. That diversity within humanity is by design. And then there's the verse says, I've created you different, not that you're going, not so your differences will make you despise each other or dislike each other, rather so you'll get to know each other. And I'm paraphrasing the verse, that's not exactly how it goes. So what that means for me, especially in chaplaincy and spiritual care, and it connects with what Rabbi Khan was saying about being curious about people and hearing their story, understanding who they are and what their needs are. So spiritual care is going to look very different depending on who you're speaking to. And we have in our tradition, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, you should want for your fellow humanity what you want for yourself. And speaking about what the rabbi said about, we got to be careful that we don't give people what we think what's good for us. But what I see in that tradition is that if I want good schools for my children, I want that for my neighbor. If I want fresh, clean water I want those things for my fellow human being. Not that I want them to look cookie cutter like me. So the Islamic tradition gives us these different ways of looking at humanity and not seeing difference as a way of disconnect or division, but actually a way to use our natural curiosity to see people and get to know them. And just briefly, if I can, I remember when my aunt had an aunt who was very sick and she was in a hospital. And I remember going to visit her. She was in the ICU and I walked in, there was a chaplain there. And I just was in awe of this person who was a stranger to us who showed up in our time of distress and stress and uncertainty. So it really drew me to this idea of serving humanity. And I thought I have all the tools from my tradition that will help me do that. So.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Tahara. And thank you for even lifting up the fact that there's beauty in diversity, that there is purpose in diversity. Oftentimes we want to kind of not see the difference, or we're scared of the difference. But you're really highlighting for us that no, we need to see those differences and actually celebrate them and embrace them. So thank you for that. Chaplain Christopher Houston, go ahead.
Sure. So how how my religious tradition shapes the care. I have to repeat it myself so I can make sure I grasp everything. How my religious tradition shapes the care I provide to people, both within my tradition and those around me, and their religious difference. Well, I'll often say that I am unapologetically a Christian pastor. In other words, I make no apologies for being a Christian pastor in any capacity. So I'm firmly that. But I also add that it enhances and is basically the ultimate test of my faith to serve people of diversity without partiality. In other words, it gives me this sense of understanding that if agape is indeed a true tenet of our faith and a goal of Christianity, then diversity has to be achieved in some capacity, whereby the expression of that faith that I carry so dearly has to have an impartiality to it that embraces people, that helps them understand without apology to who I am and what I believe. So I've often said that we may not worship together, but we have to, on some level, serve together. And that's where, just as Tahari said, we meet in the marketplace, we meet in our community, we share the same concerns of the quality of our school system and our health system, and ensure the health and safety of all persons involved. If I can for a second, my faith is significantly shaped, has significantly shaped how I provide care to people while I was serving in seminary. And I had what I now call my first church, which was my first job at seminary. And it was Bennigan's Restaurant. So Bennigan's Restaurant basically taught me a couple of practical principles. I'm going to give these to you if you don't mind. There were a couple of practical things that I felt God gave me out of my experience as a waiter at Bennigan's Restaurant. First of all, he said this: I will be serving the rest of my life. I said, oh no, Lord, please, not the rest of my life, not this. But in essence, what he explained to me, I'll be serving the rest of my life. I learned that in my first church, in Bennigan's Restaurant. Secondly, he taught me I'm not in control over who I serve. God is. I couldn't control who came through the doors of that restaurant, who they set at my table, whether they were rude, whether they were nice, whether they were Christian, whether they were of a different faith, whether they were of no faith. My service and the excellence at which I provided that could not change. It was impartial. It was excellent because it was service. I learned that in my first church. I now have since then obviously been in a prison system where I could not control who the parishioners were. I couldn't control their background. I couldn't control their sentence. I couldn't control any of what they had done in their past. None of that was a prerequisite for whether they got served or not. And so Bennigan's has reverberated and had become a foundational piece to my practical ministry. Last but not least, and this is probably one of the most crucial, is that I can only serve them what they're willing to receive. Here's what I've learned about working in diversity. It's very simple. I know what I have to offer, and I know that people are at different levels of receipt. Some get that much because that's all they're willing to receive. Some only want the dab, hey chap, how you doing, this and that. Others will come into my office and they will spend hours sitting down, and I will pour into them whatever I have to share. And I've learned different ways to do that, not just with Christianese verbiage or what have you. I've learned to take what I embrace as a Christian principle or a Christian message and make it a principle that men from other faiths and religions can grasp. This is how I believe the Christian faith has impacted how I serve in a context of diversity, without compromisation, without apology, but very well with the goal of passing the test of serving people of diversity.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate even the range in which spiritual care is provided. Like you said, just a handshake or a 2-hour conversation. So thank you for that. All right, Rabbi Bruce, how about for you?
Judaism is vast, constantly developing for over 4,000 years. Within it are often taught 18 values that comprise what is called the spiritual path of Musar, the value-based path to spiritual transformation. The 18 values are humility, patience, gratitude, compassion, order, equanimity, that is developing a good temperament, then honor, simplicity, enthusiasm, silence, generosity, truth, moderation, loving kindness, responsibility, trust, faith, and awe. By the way, the letters one uses to write the number 18 in Hebrew are the same letters used to write the Hebrew word for life. It seems no coincidence to me that there are 18 values in the spiritually transforming life of Musar. And I think it is consistent with so very much of Jewish teaching that these 18 values in Musar are meant to guide relations between Jews and between Jews and non-Jews. Let us not forget that the most often repeated commandment in the Torah, the Pentateuch, is to care for the stranger. It is stated in one way or another 36 times. So as a Navy Jewish chaplain assigned on Christmas to a squadron of minesweepers based in Florida, when no Christian chaplains were available, I led the Christmas service, I preached, I organized the Christmas blood drive and dinner and trimming the tree. Given the 18 values of Musar, what I did could not have been more Jewish. In Judaism, we are constantly challenged to live what we preach, teach, and pray.
Oh, that is beautiful, Bruce. And I saw somebody in the chat said they wanted those values because those are powerful for all of us to live by. So thank you for sharing that. Oof. All right, so we are looking very good on time. Thank you, panelists. You all are just giving us such rich content in such a short amount of time. Again, I know we are just touching the surface, but I just appreciate you all so much. So I would love to hear from you all. What is one misconception or even a common question spiritual care providers might have when engaging a care recipient from within your religious community? And again, we know no religious tradition is a monolith, so speak specifically from your experiences. And I'll start with you, Gen Chagden.
Well, first, I want to say that all those 18 values are essential in Buddhism. I just love the way that you talked about that. And I think that's this idea of respect and appreciating differences is just so crucial. So I think there are a number of misconceptions about Buddhism because we haven't been in the West for very long. One of them is that many people think there's just one Buddhist tradition with one Buddhist leader. But like every other religion, there are actually many different qualified Buddhist traditions with many different qualified Buddhist lineages and lineage holders. So there are actually two main branches of Buddhism, those seeking personal liberation and those seeking full enlightenment, to try to help everybody else to be able to do the same so that they can fulfill their deepest wish for permanent peace and happiness and freedom from suffering. On the other hand, Buddhists don't proselytize at all. So it's a personal choice. We believe that choice of a spiritual path or lack thereof are people's personal choice, and we respect that completely. So it's also very important to understand that practicing Buddhists also don't know much about other Buddhist traditions because we tend to stay within our own tradition and practice the teachings from our own lineage holders, because a qualified tradition will have a complete path to liberation and enlightenment. So I don't know much about any other Buddhist traditions. And we don't borrow things from other traditions. We try not to mix because the teachings are so clear and have been transmitted for 2,600 years. Also, another misconception is that enlightened beings are not gods. They're ordinary men and women who perfected their human qualities. So images of enlightened beings are spiritual teachings, actually. They're not idols. They're spiritual teachings that have great meaning. So it's very comforting for Buddhist practitioners to have one or more images of the Buddhas to whom they feel close, along with prayer beads called a mala to recite mantras. And then also different Buddhas represent different aspects of the enlightened mind. For instance, Buddha Green Tara, female Buddha, swift compassionate action, is a wisdom Buddha. And Buddha Manjushri is a male Buddha that represents the wisdom of the minds of all Buddhas. So whenever you see a sword or a weapon in Buddhist art, this is always a wisdom sword. This is always wisdom to cut the root of the painful and unpeaceful states of mind that we have, which we call delusions because they're distortions in our mind. So it helps us to eradicate our suffering within our mind. So I think that that's also very important to understand, because a lot of Buddhists are holding swords or axes or other things that look like weapons. But all enlightened beings have universal love and compassion and can never harm living beings. They're our closest friends and helpers. So I think that these are some basic misconceptions that people have. And I often have to explain this when people first come to our classes, because they tend to get frightened by images, but every image has a spiritual teaching associated with it.
Thank you so much, Ken Chogden. All right, Chaplain Tahara.
Thank you. I can join again in this idea of image. So Islam has this unfortunate negative image, or has its changing, of Muslims all over the world wanting to convert people, like a Quran in one hand, a sword in the other, trying to force people converting to Islam. Well, actually, there's a scripture in the Quran that says there's no compulsion when it comes to faith. In other words, we all have free will. So it's not for Muslims to go and try to impose or proselytize or bring people on our side. That's really considered against the spirit of the religion, where everyone has their own way. Faith is very personal, spirituality is very personal. So that's one thing around image. The other thing I was thinking about was a lot of people think, just here in the States, that if somebody's Muslim, they have, most Muslims are Arabs, and that's not true. Only about 20% of the Muslim population in the world are from Arabs. So we're a very diverse spiritual tradition. So some stats say that we are one of the most diverse religious traditions, with people coming from all sorts of backgrounds. Probably the largest population of Muslims are like in India, Pakistan, Malaysia, China, those areas, perhaps, or in the Middle East, but we're very diverse. Another thing I've learned in chaplaincy is a lot of my Christian or non-Muslim colleagues would say, well, I'm kind of hesitant to go visit this Muslim patient or family. I don't know if they're going to accept me because I'm not Muslim. That's far from the truth. So Muslims, we receive care from all people. People are surprised to hear that the Quran talks about Christ and Mary and Moses, and even has a scripture that says that Christ and his mother Mary are a symbol. God says Christ and Mary are a symbol of God's grace for all of humanity. So we have these connections to Judaism and Christianity and other spiritual traditions. So I would say to chaplains who are hesitant to go see a Muslim family, I would say, please go in, introduce yourself, and get to know the Muslim family. We're all very, very different and come from different cultures. So that's going to impact probably our religiosity as well. And then if I could just share just a short vignette. In my very first CPE unit, I was at Ohio State, and I remember walking into a room of a older Caucasian woman who was Catholic. And as soon as I walked in, she saw my hijab and how I appeared, and she gave me the hand. She says, "You don't believe what I believe." And I said, well, I would really love to hear what you believe if you'd like to share it with me. And so she tells me about her Catholic tradition, and we sat, and next thing I know, she's inviting me back to read the Bible with her. And then eventually she wants me to come before she goes to bed and pray with her. And one day I saw her daughter coming off the elevator, and she said, "Oh, chaplain, my mom, she just loves your visits. Please keep visiting her." So again, it goes back to this idea that story, getting to know people, looking past outer images, and really, as the scripture says, get to know people. Don't let the difference kind of push you away, but getting to know people, I think, is really important. So get to know the Muslim patients and families. You might be pleasantly surprised.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Sahar. And it's so good that you didn't take the hand as, let me not engage anymore, but you said, you know what? Let me hear from her. Let me hear her perspective. So that's powerful. Thank you. How about for you, Chaplain Christopher? Are there any misconceptions or questions that you've come across in your experience?
Well, one for sure, I think has already been echoed. Genshogden also kind of mentioned this as well. One misconception is that Christians are all alike, and we're not. We're, Christians differ in doctrine, interpretation, even service and application of life and practices. There are differences. There are degrees of spiritual devotion that vary from Christian to Christian. And you have to take that into consideration, because it kind of leads into my second kind of misconception, is people cannot mistake religion for relationship. I'm going to say that one more time. Religion and relationship are not the same thing. Oftentimes, people confuse their experience with religion, and both its good and positive experiences, as well as some of the challenging and more negative experiences that people confuse that experience and sometimes substitute that or use that as an excuse not to seek a personal relationship with God themselves. The reason why I say that's important is because each of us have to own our own personal spiritual journey. It is our personal individual responsibility. And I think it's too often one of the misconceptions with Christianity, because it does carry a majority, it does carry more prominence, it does have a very strong historical breadth with it with regards to people's experiences. It has probably touched every single person on this line in some capacity, even as I listen to the stories. But not all of those experiences are positive, and not all of those experiences are a true representation of who God wants us to be, or how he would like for that to be expressed. And I know that could be said probably for any faith, as we have those who will represent well and those not so well. But when it's all said and done, it really boils back down to, it doesn't matter so much as how other people experience God. How are you experiencing God? Don't let someone else's experience become the root of your misconception.
Thank you so much. And then Rabbi Bruce, how about for you? What are some of the misconceptions you've run across or questions?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point that you're raising, and you're going to think, folks out there, that we all collaborated on our response when you hear mine. First of all, there's the misconception. Any of the panelists could answer this for me, that all Jews are alike, have the same beliefs, the same sensibilities, the same attachment to tradition. Another is, second, that Judaism stopped developing sacred texts with the canonization of the Hebrew scriptures, what non-Jews call the Old Testament. As you may well know, when the Hebrew scriptures were being canonized, the Talmud was already well underway, and the writing of it continued for 500 years. After that, in the centuries that followed, more sacred texts appeared, such as the Zohar, the Shulchan Aruch, and so on, right to today. The Hebrew scriptures reveal much of what Judaism is, to be sure, but also much of what Judaism is not. Third, that Jews who know little of their faith won't feel strongly about being Jews. That is incorrect. Fourth, that loving Israel means that a Jew loves the policies and practices of a particular government of Israel. Not so. Fifth, that Judaism is a race. It is not. People of any race may be and are Jewish. Sixth misconception. Many people think that Orthodox Judaism is recognized by the rest of the Jewish world as the most authentic form of our faith. The seventh misconception is that worship service attendance is the most accurate measure of a Jew's commitment to one's faith. Not so.
Thank you so much. Very thorough and thoughtful. Thank you. So we're going to get into our last question. I want to invite our audience, if there are any questions that you all have, I want to make sure that I set some time aside to have some Q&A. But our last question is going to be, what might a spiritual care provider need to know when providing care to somebody from within your religious tradition, also acknowledging that not everybody is the same, not everybody practices the same. So you can speak specifically from your experience, or just a principle or just word of advice you would want to give spiritual care providers.
I think this is really important topic. For Buddhist practitioners, the practice of patience, which is to wholeheartedly accept whatever's occurring without wanting it to be different, is a main practice. So patients may underreport pain levels and symptoms as they're working on keeping their mind happy in the midst of this type of suffering. Also, I think it's a great kindness whenever possible to connect Buddhist patients with their own tradition, if possible. But on the other hand, I think that they appreciate a Buddhist from any tradition and appreciate a chaplain from any tradition that is respectful and kind and caring. So it's important to understand the Buddhist idea about death because it's simply a transition to a new rebirth. So preparing to die peacefully is a very important Buddhist practice. And we do that actually while we're healthy, so that when we're actually in the process of having a terminal illness or we're in the process of dying, we can keep our mind peaceful and happy, which creates the positive karma that's necessary to have another good rebirth where we can keep practicing, or maybe even go to a Buddha's Pure Land, which is like the best possible rebirth. So it's very important to understand that Buddhists don't necessarily want to prolong life, and they don't want to be saved at all costs. So this is where I think hospice care is so wonderful for Buddhists that are dying, because it provides a really quiet and peaceful environment. And of course, with people visiting to say mantras and maybe some of their practices that go on with death, it creates the conditions that people need to be able to die peacefully. It's also very important if relatives are falling apart, because of course, Buddhists in this country, Buddhism hasn't been here long. So most relatives of people from this country are not Buddhists. So it's very helpful to help others to leave the room if they're falling apart, or if they're clinging to the person who's dying, because the person who's dying needs to think about going to the next rebirth, not clinging to the people of this life, because they can't stop their death, but clinging creates negative karma, and it might create an unfortunate rebirth. So it's very helpful to help family members to, also participate in being peaceful and quiet. Also, when a Buddhist dies, if possible, and I know this is much more possible in hospice or nursing homes than in hospitals, it's really good to allow the body to be still for an hour or two, because the death process may take longer. The actual death process isn't what we in the West would consider death. There's a process that's going on as the gross mind dissolves into the subtle mind, as it dissolves into the very subtle mind, and then the very subtle mind has to separate from the body and goes to the next rebirth through the intermediate state. So it's very helpful if the body can be left undisturbed for a period of time afterwards. So, and of course, we have prayers are incredibly important. Reciting mantras are incredibly important. There are practices for the dying. There are practices, very important practice called poa ceremony that's performed after someone has died so that we can transfer their consciousness to a Buddhist Pure Land through meditation. And that's also incredibly important. But we also will hold funerals or memorial services according to the wishes of families besides poa ceremony. But I think that those are sort of essential things for chaplains to know when handling a Buddhist patient. But the other thing is just like in every other religion, there are some people who say they're Buddhists, but they're not practicing Buddhists. And so they're going to behave just like everybody else behaves. You know, they don't really have the protection in their mind that actually practicing Buddhists do.
Thank you so much for that. That was very helpful. I see in the chat box, people are just thanking you for sharing that wisdom. So thank you. I'm actually going to have Chaplain Christopher go next. I know that he has a hard stop at 1 p.m. So I want to make sure that we hear from him before he leaves.
Thank you. I appreciate your consideration there. Basically, I'm going to keep it brief. I would say, if anything, whatever state you find a Christian practitioner in, remember that one's faith walk is first sacred, okay? That whatever that space is, that time, that space, that moment is a sacred one. And as chaplains, we've learned, obviously, to respect the sacredness of the moment. I think that that's really kind of been the theme throughout what Gin Shogden has said, and will probably be reverberated through Tahari and Bruce's statements as well. But I think it's extremely important to remember that that walk is sacred. It's not only sacred, it's historical, okay? It has history with it. It comes with experiences. We are conscious in today's time of words like trauma and different things of that nature. I think it's important to realize that there's a historical element that has to be assessed as well with regards to our care. It's also multifaceted. It's internal and it's external. If you really want to go a little bit further, it's internally and externally enmeshed. It's a complicated mix of both our internal and our external, both emotions and perceptions and different things of that nature. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a hospital room or walked into a prison cell and been met with every preconceived notion and idea that a person can bring with them, whether it be by color, whether it be by gender, whether it be the fact that I'm a Christian or what have you. And as chaplains, we've been well-versed as how to filter through and navigate past and beyond some of those barriers and walls that people put up. But it has a historical context, but it's not, it makes it nonetheless more, less sacred. Last but not least, everyone has a love language or a form of expressed care that speaks to them best. In other words, chaplains often specialize in being patient enough to discern how best to express their care. So if there's anything that I can offer with regards to that, I would hope that people would remember that in their professional journey and search. Sit with the context, no matter how difficult it is. Sit with the context. Can I share this last piece? I know our time is getting short, but I'm going to say this one piece because I think it provides the value that I need. As a prison chaplain, a father of young children at the time, I found myself serving as a chaplain of one of our institutions. And at the time, 75% of my congregation, I'm gonna let that sit for a second. Guess what? I asked God, how am I supposed to do this? I have young children, I have my own preconceived notions, my own ideas. You know, CPE helps us get all that stuff out, right? Well, I sat with it, and here's what God said. You learn to pastor whoever I set before you. Your service does not change. And I offer that because I had to sit and look at some very difficult situations and circumstances. But the difficulty didn't make it any less sacred. The history made it probably more sacred once I began to sit with it and figure out how to become a pastor to 75% men at that time who were sex offenders. And we did it, and we did it well. And hopefully that service of impartiality made them better in the long run. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Chaplain Christopher, and thank you for being here with us. I know you won't be able to stick around for our breakout rooms, but I just want to make sure that you were able to share some last comments before you had to leave. So thank you.
Alicia,
right.
If you would share my information.
Yes,
so that if there are questions, I would love to follow up with anyone who does have questions for me. I'd be happy to answer those questions offline. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, Chaplain Tahara, and then Rabbi Bruce, you'll have the last word.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if my internet is pausing every now and then. So I think your question was, you were asking about, I'm sorry.
I'll restate it, yes. What might a spiritual care provider need to know when providing care to someone from within your religious tradition?
Okay, wonderful. So in the Quran, every chapter of the Quran starts in the name of God, the most gracious, the most compassionate. So it's a reminder for us of the divine love and compassion that we have within us and within our lives. So that same root word for that compassion that's used to describe God, I'm sorry, every chapter except one starts that way, is the same root word from the mother's womb, raham. And so there's this idea that every human being is ushered into the world through this womb or place of warmth, compassion, love, into a space or world that may not be the same. We get sick, we have trauma, we have things that happen that can disrupt that idea of this safe space that we are in our mother's womb. So it reminds me of, in the Dictionary of Pastoral Care and Counseling, it talks about how when people are sick or going through something, their whole world gets turned upside down. They start having doubts about maybe their faith, their safety within their own body, anxiety, they have anxiety, stress, and then may have questions of theodicy or just question their faith. But then the dictionary goes on to say, but that can happen at any point in life. You don't have to be sick to have those struggles. So when I think about that, as I'm approaching any patient, but specifically for a Muslim patient, we know that we come out of this place of warmth and compassion and that we have this divine covering. However, the world's not going to necessarily be that way. So understanding that as a spiritual care provider, your love, your compassion, your respect for whatever you hear and see, to be able to hold it for a Muslim is so important, I think, because we understand that the Quran says that everyone is going to suffer death, loss, and other struggles of being human. So just being there and to bear witness to a Muslim story, to allow them to talk through, if they want to, how their medical decisions or what they're going to do next is congruent with their faith, if that's important to them. Help them have resources, maybe get an imam to help answer questions if that's what they need. And if they don't need any of that and they just want your presence, or they want your presence, to listen, to hear their story, to hear what they may be struggling with, but understanding that we see the divine as the most compassionate and loving presence that we have. And just bearing witness to that, I think would be amazing.
Thank you so much, Chaplain. What a beautiful image to leave us with, that, the compassion as the womb. So thank you for that. Yes. All right, Rabbi Bruce.
Hey, thank you. As I already suggested, things to keep in mind. A Jew may believe in God or not. A Jew may affirm agnosticism or atheism. A Jew who believes in God may affirm a miracle-working God or accept a theonaturalistic theological position, such as that espoused by Mordecai M. Kaplan, or affirm a monotheistic pantheism or panentheism, as did Martin Buber. Second, a Jew may be comfortable with clergy of other faiths or deeply suspicious. Please know that the pressure not to be Jews placed on us by too many clergy over the millennia has been unrelenting and often violent. Third, know that a Jew may believe in an afterlife or not. While there are traditional Jewish ideas about the places one goes after passing away, there are also evolving ideas about afterlife. Fourth, Judaism's concept of a Messiah does not include that the Messiah is deity. In Judaism, the Messiah may be a human messenger or even an idea of a messianic age of justice, peace, and love. Fifth, Judaism does not accept the concepts of being born in sin or of vicarious atonement. One is born pure, and one is accountable for one's own atonement. Sixth, a Jew may be completely unaffiliated with a synagogue or any branch of Judaism, and yet be thoroughly committed to one's people and faith. Seventh, a Jew may see one's Jewishness as a faith, or as a peoplehood, or as a culture, or as a set of rituals, or as a set of ethics, or as a history, or as a country, or even as all of the above.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. If you wouldn't mind in the chat, just giving gratitude and thanksgiving to this amazing panelists. Again, they didn't have a whole lot of time, but I just feel like with each of their explanations and stories and experiences, they shared so much with us. So if you wouldn't mind just thanking them for their presence and their wisdom. So I just want to thank each of you so much. We have time for one question, because I do want to give time for people to actually connect and breakout rooms, those who can remain. And I wanted to lift up this question from somebody who is going through CPE. And if you all could very briefly touch on this, or actually they're a new chaplain, and they said, what advice can you give a new chaplain, and how important is self-care to those navigating chaplaincy in particular? Again, what advice would you give a new chaplain, and how important is self-care to those navigating chaplaincy in particular? And just very briefly, if you can touch on that. Again, Chogden, we'll start with you.
That's a wonderful question. So self-care is incredibly important. And in Buddhism, we look at it with an analogy of taking care of an ambulance. So we're not talking about indulging ourselves, but we're talking about truly taking care of ourselves so that we then have the energy and ability to care for others. I want to pick up on one thing that Rabbi had said, which was this idea of complete purity, because Buddhists also believe that we have a completely pure nature, and we just need to uncover all of the negativity in our mind to actualize that completely pure nature. So I would say that this is really important for a beginning chaplain, because they can gradually uncover their completely pure nature too and learn. So I think that the most important thing is respect, having respect for whomever you go see and listening to them well, and really communicating that you are showing care and consideration. And I think that'll go a long way as you learn how to be a chaplain.
Thank you. And how about for you, Chaplain Tahara, any advice about self-care practices?
Yeah, I would just say to be very mindful of your self-care and to stay aware if you're starting to feel any symptoms of burnout or compassion fatigue. So it can happen and we can sneak up on you. So to be mindful of that and try to find a ritual for yourself around your identity. One of the things that I do when I leave the hospital, I physically remove my badge as I badge out of the parking lot. As I remove my badge and put it in my purse, that's like an indication, okay, now I'm not that I'm leaving everyone behind me, but my role is shifting. I'm going home to be wife, mom. I'm still a chaplain, but I am all these other things as well. So maybe having a ritual for yourself. And if you're in CPE, I think you said you have, you're in your first unit of CPE. CPE really is what you make it. So it's how you engage those outcomes, how you give grace to yourself, to try different things, explore your story, see what works well for you, and where you get stuck. And remember, in CPE, I say this all the time, we may come to CPE with this idea of what our strengths and growing edges are. In ministry, the things that we think are our strengths sometimes can be a hindrance, and those things that we think are a weakness can be a strength. So I would just say those things and wish you the best. And please reach out if you need any support, especially around CPE.
Thank
you so much. And how about for you, Rabbi Bruce, any last advice?
Yeah, I have to clean this up a little. My very first day as a Navy chaplain, after going to chaplain school, after ordination chaplain school and so on, a Marine sergeant who was back on 30 days leave from Okinawa, which was an unaccompanied tour. They couldn't have family with him at the time. Came in, he was a walk-in. I was brand new, so I got the walk-ins. And he came in and he told me that he had come back from Okinawa the night before. He didn't tell his wife that he was returning. He wanted to surprise her, which he did, and found her in bed with a sailor. He then said, "Excuse me," closed the door, went to sleep, came in to see me the next morning, to see the chaplain's office the next morning. And he said to me, "Chaplain, I think I have a marital problem." Over the next, I have to shorten it up. So I think I have a marital problem. And there were a whole lot of other literally unbelievable things that I don't have time to go and tell you right now. And this is my first day. So I just can't believe what I'm hearing. And I went in to see the senior chaplain and I said, "This man's in, what do I do? He's telling me these things." I told the senior chaplain, and the senior chaplain said, "Well, what do you think you're here for?" So I walked out down the passageway and I apparently said, "Help." And two Methodist chaplains, both with credentials and counseling out the wazoo, came out of their offices, heard me, came out of their offices. One of them patted me on the head, told me it would be all right. The other one took me to a little chapel that was right there and sat me down. And they both convinced me things would be okay. And they both came with me back into my office and they took over. There's a whole lot more to the story, which I'll skip. But my point is to find outstanding mentors. For the next 2 years, those two chaplains trained me in how to be an effective counselor of anyone. And eventually, when they went on leave, they would tell the people that they were working with that if they needed help while they were gone, that they should look me up. So it's one thing is to find really good mentors and learn everything you can from them. The second thing about personal care is when I get exhausted, and when you're out on a ship and you're in a war or war game exercise, you're up 20 hours a day working nonstop, and you run out of fuel. So when I would do that, I learned to sit down, open my arms, close my eyes, and invite God in. And I would be replenished. And it not just happened once or twice, it's been going on like that for 50 years. So I would say have a way, doesn't have to be my way, but find a way, effective way to be replenished when you need it most.
Oh, thank you so much for each of your wisdom. I hope that helped. Whoever asked that question, I hope that helped. And even those who are seasoned chaplains, just the reminder of finding mentors and making sure that we recognize we're just not chaplains, but we have, a multiplicity to ourselves, and recognizing, even triaging when we have to say, hey, you take it from here. So thank you for your wisdom. And I hope that you will join us for our fall programming, and you will join us for our lunch and learns that we'll be having actually in October and November. And again, all of this information you can get if you subscribe to our newsletter. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciated spending this hour and a half with you. We hope that you got a lot from the conversation from our panelists, and also made some connections with those in your breakout room. And we do have a survey at the end of this session, if you would not mind taking that survey so that we can get your feedback about future programming. And so thank you again, and we hope to see you in the future. Have a wonderful day.